But the promotion went to Dave, a man who had only been with the company for a few years and had yet to even prove himself in some of the more challenging flights that I had been doing for decades. The sting of that loss hit harder than I expected, not just because of the promotion, but because of what it represented. Every step forward I had made in my career was always going to be overshadowed by my gender. When Dave made that comment in front of the team, I couldn't help but feel the weight of it press down on me. He probably thought it was just a harmless remark, something he could laugh off, but I knew what he was really saying. It was the same thing I had been hearing my entire career: women don't belong in this industry. Even after all my experience, my qualifications, my achievements, there was still the assumption that I wasn't cut out for the job. It was a feeling I had buried for years, but with Dave's words, it all came rushing back. Every time someone questioned my abilities or second-guessed my judgment, every time I had to prove I was just as capable, every time I had to stand my ground against some condescending comment, these moments all built up to this one. And I knew, deep down, that I couldn't keep letting this happen. The room was silent for a long moment. No one spoke up in my defense, but I refused to let the silence swallow me whole. I wasn't going to let Dave and his cronies dictate my worth. I had earned my place here. More than that, I had fought for it. "Dave," I said, my voice steady but fierce, "you're wrong. People don't want to feel safe because of who's in charge, they want to feel safe because of what that person knows. And I know this job better than anyone in this room." I could feel the tension shift as the others in the room shifted uncomfortably, but none of them challenged me. They didn't have to. I had the upper hand here, and I was going to use it. What I've learned in 25 years of flying is that the sky doesn't care who you are. It doesn't care about your gender, your age, or your background. It only cares about whether you can get the job done. And I've gotten it done every single time, I continued, my voice growing more confident with each word. So, if you don't think I'm the best person for this job, I suggest you take a closer look at the numbers. Because at the end of the day, that's all that matters. There was a beat of silence before Dave shifted in his chair, clearly taken aback by my response. I could tell he hadn't expected me to fight back. But I wasn't just fighting for the promotion anymore. I was fighting for my place in this industry, for every woman who had ever been told she wasn't good enough, and for every person who had ever been overlooked because of something they couldn't control. As I finished speaking, I could see a few of the others in the room nodding slightly. Whether they agreed with me or not, they knew better than to keep the conversation going. It was clear that I wasn't going to let this slide, and that I wouldn't be backing down anytime soon. Walking out of that meeting, I felt a mixture of emotions: anger, pride, frustration, and determination. But above all, I felt ready. Ready to fight for what I deserved. Ready to show the world that a woman in charge wasn't a joke, it was a force to be reckoned with. I stayed up for nights on end, surrounded by notebooks, coffee mugs, and flight manuals, building something from the ground up. Every page I filled was a blueprint, not for just a flight school, but for a revolution. I wrote down every barrier I had faced, every lesson I had learned the hard way, and every piece of advice I wished someone had given me when I first slipped into that pilot's seat. It wasn't just about teaching women how to fly, it was about teaching them how to endure, how to lead, and how to stand tall in a world that constantly tried to shrink them. The idea seemed wild at first, radical, even. Who was I to launch a flight school? But the more I thought about it, the clearer it became. If I didn't build a space for women in aviation, who would? So I cashed in part of my retirement fund, found an old hangar outside Denver that had seen better days, and signed the lease. It was cold, leaky, and smelled like grease, but it was mine. I called it Altitude Academy, a name that spoke not just to flying high, but to rising above everything that tried to keep us grounded. I reached out to every woman I had ever served with, flown alongside, or mentored. I asked them to join me. "We're building something big," I said. "And it's for us." Some of them were skeptical, but most of them said yes. Within a few months, we had flight simulators, a refurbished fleet of small aircraft, and a training program tailored for women. Not easier, never easier, but real. Honest. Supportive. grounded in the idea that confidence and competence could be taught side by side. Our first class filled up in just 10 days. Women from all walks of life applied, former military, stay-at-home moms, mechanics, engineers, even a barista who had dreamed of flying since she was a kid but had never had the chance. When I saw them all standing in a row for orientation, eyes wide with anticipation and fear, I realized this wasn't just my dream anymore. It belonged to all of us. Then something unexpected happened. One morning, I got an email from Dave, the same guy who once said a woman in charge was a tough sell. He had read about altitude in a national aviation magazine and wanted to collaborate on training standards. I stared at the screen for a long time. Then I hit delete. I didn't need his approval, and I sure as hell didn't need his help. What mattered was the message I got later that week from a trainee named Luz. She wrote, "I never thought I'd belong in a cockpit until I saw someone like you leading one. That was everything. That was why I built this. Now, every time I walk through the doors of Altitude Academy, I remember who I built it for. For the girl who's told to dream smaller. For the woman passed over again and again. For myself. Because they were right about one thing, I don't play by their rules anymore. I'm too busy writing new ones." I squared my shoulders and gave him the same answer I'd already given a dozen times. It's not a niche. It's an unmet need. And if you can't see that, you're not the right fit. Most of them weren't. But a few were. One morning, after another string of rejections, I got a call from an aviation nonprofit that supported underrepresented communities in aerospace. A woman named Denise Morales was on the line. "I heard about your pitch," she said. "You're not wrong. We've been trying to partner with someone who understands what real inclusion looks like. Let's talk." That conversation changed everything. With their support, we secured a grant big enough to lease a small hangar at the local airport. It wasn't much, just enough for a shared office, a couple of flight simulators, and our first training plane. But it was a start. The day we signed the lease, Laura brought champagne in paper cups. "To the future," she said, raising hers. I clinked mine against hers, the bubbles fizzing over the rim, and for the first time, the dream didn't feel so far off. We called the school Skyward Academy. Our tagline: flight, confidence, freedom. The first cohort was just 5 students, 5 nervous, determined women who reminded me so much of myself. One was a high school science teacher. Another had left her job in finance. Each had a story that told me this wasn't just viable, it was necessary. We trained in donated classrooms and flew borrowed aircraft on weekends. Nothing about it was easy. But every time a student completed her first solo flight, I felt like we were shifting something bigger than just her altimeter. We were rewriting who belonged in the sky. And slowly, word spread. Applications trickled in. A regional airline reached out, curious about partnerships. An engineering firm offered to sponsor a scholarship. We weren't just making noise, we were gaining altitude. When people ask me now how I knew it would work, I don't say I knew. I say I believed. I believed in the power of telling women, yes, you can. And I believed that if I could plant that message in enough hearts, it wouldn't just lift them off the ground. It would help us all soar. The growth was overwhelming but exhilarating. Each day brought a new challenge, whether it was finding the resources to accommodate more students or navigating the logistics of expanding the program. We had quickly outgrown the small hangar we had started in, and before long, we were looking at larger facilities, more aircraft, and additional staff to keep up with the demand. But it wasn't just the practical side of things that was growing, it was the sense of community. The women we were training weren't just gaining flight hours, they were gaining confidence, learning to challenge the stereotypes that had held them back for so long. It became clear to me that we were doing more than just teaching aviation, we were changing lives. One afternoon, I stood outside watching a group of students practice their maneuvers on the tarmac. Sarah, the young mechanic who had been the first to enroll, was busy leading a group of students through an engine check drill. Janet, the retired nurse, was up in the air for her second solo flight. I could see her smile from the cockpit as she banked the plane, her dreams finally coming true. As I watched them, I realized that the journey had just begun. The challenges ahead would be immense, but so were the rewards. The Academy had already made such a tangible impact on the lives of these women, and I was determined to ensure that it continued to grow. One of the most moving moments came when we had our first graduation ceremony. It was a small gathering, but it felt monumental. I stood in front of the class, each woman beaming with pride in their uniforms. "You've worked incredibly hard to get here," I said, choking back tears. "You've proven that women have a place in this industry, and you've shown the world what we're capable of. You all have the power to change the future of aviation." That day, I realized that our work at the Women's Aviation Academy was more than just about flying planes. It was about breaking barriers, about empowering women to take control of their futures and show the world that we could do anything, even in an industry where women were still underrepresented. The dream I had when I first sat in that cockpit at 9 years old, fueled by my dad's words to never let anyone tell me my dreams were too big, was no longer just a dream. It was a reality, not just for me but for every woman who had walked through those hangar doors. And I knew that no matter what happened next, I would keep fighting for a future where women could thrive in aviation without ever having to prove themselves to anyone. The growth was overwhelming but exhilarating. Each day brought a new challenge, whether it was finding the resources to accommodate more students or navigating the logistics of expanding the program. We had quickly outgrown the small hangar we had started in, and before long, we were looking at larger facilities, more aircraft, and additional staff to keep up with the demand. But it wasn't just the practical side of things that was growing, it was the sense of community. The women we were training weren't just gaining flight hours, they were gaining confidence, learning to challenge the stereotypes that had held them back for so long. It became clear to me that we were doing more than just teaching aviation, we were changing lives. One afternoon, I stood outside watching a group of students practice their maneuvers on the tarmac. Sarah, the young mechanic who had been the first to enroll, was busy leading a group of students through an engine check drill. Janet, the retired nurse, was up in the air for her second solo flight. I could see her smile from the cockpit as she banked the plane, her dreams finally coming true. As I watched them, I realized that the journey had just begun. The challenges ahead would be immense, but so were the rewards. The Academy had already made such a tangible impact on the lives of these women, and I was determined to ensure that it continued to grow. One of the most moving moments came when we had our first graduation ceremony. It was a small gathering, but it felt monumental. I stood in front of the class, each woman beaming with pride in their uniforms. "You've worked incredibly hard to get here," I said, choking back tears. "You've proven that women have a place in this industry, and you've shown the world what we're capable of. You all have the power to change the future of aviation." That day, I realized that our work at the Women's Aviation Academy was more than just about flying planes, it was about breaking barriers, about empowering women to take control of their futures and show the world that we could do anything, even in an industry where women were still underrepresented. The dream I had when I first sat in that cockpit at 9 years old, fueled by my dad's words to never let anyone tell me my dreams were too big, was no longer just a dream. It was a reality, not just for me but for every woman who had walked through those hangar doors. And I knew that no matter what happened next, I would keep fighting for a future where women could thrive in aviation without ever having to prove themselves to anyone. It didn't take long for Laura and me to realize we were running ourselves into the ground. Between flying lessons, paperwork, scheduling, maintenance, and outreach, we were barely holding things together. One night, while reviewing our roster for the 10th time that week, Laura rubbed her eyes and said, "Chloe, we need help. There's no way we can keep doing this with just the two of us." I nodded. We were passionate, yes, but we weren't invincible. The following morning, we put out a job listing, not just for instructors, but for people who shared our vision. We were building something more than just a school, we were building a movement. We wanted instructors who understood that. The response blew us away. We started hearing from women all over the country. One of the first to apply was Jasmine, a former Air Force pilot who had stepped away from flying after becoming a mother. She told us that she'd been waiting for the right moment and the right mission to return to the cockpit. Another was Priya, who had spent nearly a decade flying commercial but had grown tired of being the only woman on the flight deck. She said our academy reignited her purpose. By the end of that hiring cycle, we had formed a team of strong, skilled, and deeply committed instructors. With their support, we could finally handle the volume of students coming in without compromising what made the academy special. The vision was growing, and it was in good hands. A year into this journey, everything felt different. The once quiet airfield now buzzed with energy. The laughter of students echoed in the hangars, radios crackled with checklists, and the sky above was regularly traced with the paths of our trainees in flight. But nothing prepared me for the email that popped into my inbox one Monday morning. It was from a talent coordinator at Horizon Air. "Hi Chloe," it began. "We've heard wonderful things about your program. We'd love to connect and see if any of your graduates might be a fit for our entry-level pilot positions. The talent coming out of your academy sounds extraordinary." I stared at the screen for a second before calling Laura. "You will not believe who just emailed us," I said, practically shouting into the phone. "Horizon Air wants to hire our graduates." I could hear her yell with excitement. "Chloe, this is the breakthrough. This is what we've been pushing toward." And it was. Over the following weeks, we received interest from other regional airlines, a few private charter groups, and even one major international carrier. Our students were gaining a reputation, not just as competent pilots, but as the new face of aviation. Every time one of our graduates accepted a job offer, we celebrated. It was proof that the industry was finally opening its eyes, and we had played a part in that. Then came another surprise. A local high school principal, Mrs. Turner, reached out to me directly. She'd heard about our school through a parent and was putting together a career day. "Chloe," she said, "I'd love it if you could speak to our students, especially the girls. They need to see women like you and know what's possible." I paused briefly. Speaking in front of a gym full of high schoolers wasn't exactly my usual scene, but I understood how important this moment could be. "Absolutely," I said, masking my nerves with a smile. "I'd be honored." On the day of the talk, I stepped into the gymnasium, greeted by the hum of chatter and shifting chairs. Rows of students filled the bleachers, the energy in the room a mix of curiosity and restlessness. Mrs. Turner introduced me as a pioneer in aviation, and the words hit me unexpectedly. I felt a tightness in my chest as I approached the mic. "When I was in high school," I began, scanning the sea of faces, "I had my first flying lesson. I remember gripping the controls and thinking, this is what I want to do with my life." But I also remember the skepticism. The doubts. People telling me it was too ambitious for someone like me. I paused, letting the silence settle. "I'm here to tell you that no one gets to decide how high you fly except for you." The students grew still, their eyes fixed on me as I walked them through my path, each obstacle, every moment of doubt, and the day I founded the academy. Afterward, I opened the floor to questions. A young girl in the front, maybe 15, raised her hand. "Do you think someone like me could really be a pilot?" she asked hesitantly. I smiled, my answer unwavering. "Yes, I do. In fact, I'm certain. If you want it badly enough, come find me at the academy when you're ready. We'll make it happen." The look on her face was unforgettable. It was the kind of spark I had once felt myself. Weeks later, I stood on the tarmac beside our newest student, Lisa. She was a single mother in her mid-30s, fiercely determined and full of quiet grit. During one of our early sessions, she told me she'd spent years shelving her dream, caught between raising her son and working 2 jobs. "I always thought flying was for other people," she admitted once, almost embarrassed. "Not for people like me." But here she was, climbing into the cockpit for her first solo flight. Her son stood beside me, eyes wide, barely breathing. I watched as she guided the plane down the runway. The second her wheels left the ground, the group around us erupted in cheers. Her son whispered, almost in awe, "That's my mom." When she landed and climbed out, Her face was lit up with the kind of joy that comes from doing something you never thought you'd get to do. Her son ran to her, wrapping his arms around her in pure pride. "You're the coolest mom ever," he said. Lisa looked over at me, her voice shaking with emotion. "Chloe, thank you. You didn't just teach me to fly, you gave me my life back." Driving home that evening, I replayed the moment over and over. For years, I'd believed success meant climbing ladders and reaching milestones. But that night, watching Lisa fly, I realized what really mattered: creating a space for people to believe in themselves. This wasn't just about planes or lessons. It was about hope, second chances, and lifting others high enough to see their own potential. This was why I started it all. This was where I truly belonged. I stood, my legs unsteady, a wave of emotion crashing over me. I had prepared for the speech I was about to give, but I hadn't expected this honor, this recognition from an industry that had once rejected me. As I walked toward the stage, my mind raced. I was about to step into the spotlight, but this time, it was for something I had earned, something I had built with my own hands. The applause around me was deafening, but I was aware of every step I took, my eyes scanning the room. There were so many faces, some familiar, some unfamiliar, but all of them watching me now, seeing me in a way they never had before. When I reached the podium, I took a moment to compose myself before the microphone. "Thank you," I began, my voice thick with emotion. "Thank you so much for this incredible honor. When I started the Women's Aviation Academy, I didn't know how far we'd go. I didn't know that we'd be able to grow, to challenge the status quo, and to change the narrative in an industry that often felt closed off to women like me." I paused, allowing the gravity of my words to settle. I've spent my entire career trying to prove that I belonged, that women belong in aviation, and that we can do this just as well as anyone else. But the real work has always been in creating a space where others can thrive, where young girls like the ones in our program don't have to fight as hard as we did to get there. The room was silent, hanging on my words. I could see the faces of the women who had been with me through it all: Laura, the first students, the ones who had been part of this journey since the very beginning. Their smiles were my strength. "We're not just training pilots," I continued, my confidence growing as I spoke. "We're creating leaders, innovators, and pioneers. Every woman who walks through those doors is proving that the sky is not the limit, it's just the beginning." The applause started again, this time stronger, louder. I smiled, my heart swelling with pride. I had done it. I had built something that mattered, something that would last long after I was gone. As I stepped off the stage, the recognition didn't feel like an end, it felt like a new beginning. The challenges weren't over, but for the first time I felt like I had finally reached the place I was meant to be. I was no longer fighting to prove myself to others. I was building a legacy for the future, a future where women could take to the skies without ever having to question their place there. Laura caught up to me, her face beaming. "You were amazing," she said, her voice full of excitement. "We're just getting started, Chloe." I laughed, feeling the weight of everything we had accomplished and everything still ahead of us. "This is just the beginning," I agreed, looking out at the crowd, knowing that with every step forward, we were rewriting the story of aviation, one woman at a time. As I walked up to the stage, the sound of applause echoed through the ballroom, but my focus was fixed on one thing: him. Standing at the back, arms crossed and visibly uneasy, was Dave. The same man who once looked me dead in the eye and said passengers wouldn't feel comfortable with a woman in command. And now, he was here, witnessing this moment. I accepted the award, my hands trembling slightly as I took hold of the plaque. I stepped up to the microphone, steadying my breath. "Thank you," I began, my voice clear despite the storm of emotions inside me. "I founded the Women's Aviation Academy because I got tired of hearing the word no. No, you don't look the part. No, you're too ambitious. No, this just isn't the right fit." This award is not just for me, it's for every woman who's been told no and chose to rise anyway. The room erupted with applause, but my eyes found only Dave. His once confident smirk had been replaced with something more complicated: uncertainty, maybe even regret. For the first time, I felt something shift. This wasn't just a win for me, it was a rebuttal to every person who ever doubted me. A turning point. As the gala came to an end and guests began to disperse, I lingered behind, the award still warm in my hands. Laura had already stepped out to grab the car, leaving me to weave through the thinning crowd alone. That's when I saw him again, Dave, sipping a drink near the exit. For a moment, I thought about walking right past him, disappearing into the night with my head held high. But then he looked up and our eyes locked. There was no going back. "Chloe," he said, his voice tight with forced pleasantry. "Impressive speech. And the award, congratulations." "Thanks, Dave," I replied evenly. "It's interesting, isn't it? A few years ago, you told me a woman couldn't handle leadership. And now, here I am." His smile twitched, fading quickly. He glanced away, his composure slipping. "It wasn't personal. That's just how things worked back then." "The way things worked," I repeated, my tone sharp but calm. "No, Dave, that's how you worked. And the industry let you. But that's changing now. This space is evolving. You can either move with it, or you can be left behind. I've made my choice. What about you?" He didn't respond. Maybe he couldn't. I turned and stepped out into the cool evening air, the night quiet and calm around me. For the first time in years, I felt weightless. The battle wasn't over, but tonight was a landmark, and I had no intention of stopping here. As I made my way home that night, the award resting gently in my lap, I found myself replaying the evening over and over, the standing ovation, the heartfelt congratulations, and the stunned pride in Dave's expression. It almost didn't feel real. But more than anything, it confirmed what I had suspected for some time now. Founding the Women's Aviation Academy wasn't just the right move, it was the most meaningful decision I had ever made. When I walked through my front door, I set the award down on the mantel, right beside a photo of my father. He had passed away just 6 months earlier, but I could still hear his voice clear as day. "Never let anyone tell you your dreams are too big." For years, I'd sought validation from people who would never truly see me. But now? I wasn't chasing approval. I was charting a path, my own. I sank into the couch and opened my phone, scrolling through an endless stream of messages, former students, fellow pilots, even complete strangers, all sending their congratulations. And for the first time in years, I felt a deep, quiet peace. The journey was far from over. There were still challenges ahead and ceilings left to shatter. But tonight? Tonight was a win. Not just for me, but for every woman who had been told she didn't belong in the sky. And as I looked once more at the photo of my dad beside that golden plaque, a soft smile tugged at my lips. The sky was never the limit. It was only the beginning. And together, we were rewriting the flight path, one dream at a time. If you enjoyed this story, be sure to hit the like button and subscribe to our channel. It helps us grow and make sure you don't miss the next incredible story we share. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you again soon.